How do you do, fellow kids? Yay! My skateboard!
For those of us who are still in school, let's talk about advocacy.
Hello, brains. I wanted to do an episode for a long time about how to advocate for yourself when you're in school with your peer group, with your teachers, with the other adults in your life, with your parents' friends, just anybody that you need to advocate for yourself with. As a kid, you're really not in a strong power position. You kind of have to do what the adults around you say. So it's especially important to be able to advocate for yourself. That said, I am clearly no longer in school. How do you do, fellow kids? So I thought it would be really cool to hear from somebody who is still in high school. Her name is Lucy. She is Caroline McGuire's daughter, and she knows just about as much about ADHD as I do. I do want to acknowledge before we get into this episode that we are both in a position of immense privilege. We are both white. We both are surrounded by people who believe in ADHD. We have the supports that we need to be able to thrive as somebody with ADHD. And not everybody's in that position. But even still, even in the position that we are both trying to advocate for ourselves on a pretty regular basis. I think no matter what, you run into people who don't know what ADHD is, who don't take the struggles seriously. Maybe they have ADHD themselves, but they don't struggle with the things that you struggle with. So you're still having to speak up for yourself. You're still having to explain. You're still having to advocate for yourself. And so I just really wanted to talk about what that's like on a day-to-day basis, what challenges she faces in school and what she does about it. So without further ado, this is Lucy. Ow, my head!
Hi, I'm Lucy. I have been diagnosed with ADHD since I was 6 years old and have been really interested in learning about what makes me me and what my ADHD influences in my brain, and then also understanding what I need to be the most successful version of myself. I've been diagnosed with dysgraphia, dyslexia. I also have a memory learning disability where I don't really have a very good short-term memory. I struggle with perceptual processing. Oh, yeah. ADHD as well as anxiety. So that's a lot to have to explain to people. And I don't always explain all of it at once because there's just too much. But I do try to explain in words that people could understand. I've grown up in a place where some people, most people at least, know a bit about ADHD, dyslexia, and anxiety to a certain extent. I think if your parents don't believe in ADHD or in any of these learning disabilities or other learning disabilities I haven't listed, I usually give them, or I tell them, to use books and articles to really accumulate more knowledge before going to their parents, so that the parents don't blame it on something like social media or phones or people around you, so that you can say, I have X, Y, and Z symptom, and that correlates with this thing. I have evidence to back up why I think this. A lot of the times, if you come to parents with evidence and you work at it slowly, give them more and more information and let them process this decision, a lot of times it's a process instead of just one big conversation. Situations I find myself most in, where I need to advocate for myself, are in the school setting. I'm explaining why I need certain accommodations or why I'm taking a test a certain way, whereas they're taking it a completely different way. When people come to me and feel like, oh, why do you get this special thing? I kind of explain that instead of giving me an advantage, it's giving me the time or the ability to perform at that same level as others, because my performance without those things wouldn't be anywhere near where I really could perform. Yeah, even outside of a school setting, things like my ADHD are really, really impactful, and generally they start to understand that it's not so much a special advantage, it's a thing that I have to use to get myself to where I need to be. I run into people telling me I am too smart to have any of these things very frequently, especially when I was younger. I think a lot of people struggle to understand that things like ADHD or dyslexia or dysgraphia or any of those aren't correlated to how intelligent someone is. I think most people don't come from a place of malice. They come from a place of ignorance or a lack of understanding. Unless you either are impacted by these things or have a family member or a friend or just have seen it before, it's harder to understand the ins and outs of everything because you haven't seen it. You know, they'll say things,
Don't we all have a little ADHD? You don't have ADHD. I see you sitting still all the time. People with ADHD aren't like you. Sometimes I think I should have extra time. It's not fair that just you get it.
I will try to tell them, hey, you know, that's really not true. Or, hey, that's actually not a term we use, or that's not something I would say, that's kind of mean. But for the most part, then they'll turn their behavior around, or at least around me. Then the people who do clearly come from a place of malice, I sometimes correct them, but sometimes I say just, they're trying to provoke me on purpose because they know I'm going to say, hey, actually, that's not true. Out of ignorance, someone might say, hey, are you gonna outgrow your ADHD? Or have you tried flashcards? I'll say, yes, I have. I use flashcards very frequently, but I just need more time with them. Or someone would say, my friend's niece's cousin's dog walker's brother has ADHD, and they were able to eat a cleaner diet, and it doesn't show up anymore. Eating better or something, or doing yoga might be another outlet for someone with ADHD, but it's not going to take away their ADHD because ADHD is characterized by a unique brain wiring. So you still have ADHD. I have advocated for my friends, but not in a direct sense. I help them to either gather the courage they need to advocate for themselves, or I give them the resources and knowledge that they might need to back up their arguments and to just understand where they're coming from themselves and to be a better expert in themselves. I don't like to advocate for people directly if it's a bigger thing, because it might need to be from them, especially when you're talking to parents or teachers, to really get through and to really make them understand that this is them who's saying this. This isn't me influencing them. I will even think of a conversation and help you reenact that. I could even help you while you're advocating for yourself, but I can't be the one to do it because you really need to be that one to do it. In school, I advocate for myself very often. I think there are certain times where it needs to be a letter from my parents, because that's the only way that someone like a guidance counselor or someone is going to enact a certain process. But most of the time, especially when I'm talking to just my guidance counselor or I'm talking to a teacher, I am the one advocating, and I'll often think through things with my parents beforehand, so I go in there prepared. I feel like sometimes people don't take me seriously, but I think for the most part, I try to hold myself in a way that allows me to be seen by them and to go into a conversation as if we are relatively equal. You obviously have to be quite polite to someone like a guidance counselor or a teacher, where you might have them as a teacher again, or you have an entire year with this teacher. Or for a guidance counselor, you're probably going to have them all of the years of your high school career, and they might have to write like a college recommendation. And so it's better to keep relationships from not falling apart if I'm coming in there and not prepared and confident that I won't feel like I can really accomplish this, and then they won't really feel like they need to do it. My anxiety when it comes to having these conversations is often quelled a bit by rehearsing them. Rehearsing things really starts to let me see like different situations that could occur and lets me kind of think of what's the worst scenario that could happen. I think also while I'm in the conversation, I do usually feel a lot of anxiety because it's just this mix of like almost adrenaline and anxiety. To really overcome it, I don't think is possible, but I'm still the expert of my own mind, even if someone else doesn't fully believe it. So I need to convince them, believe that in myself, to really understand that just because you're young doesn't mean you don't understand your own brain.
kids these days. Seriously though, Lucy had a lot of really great things to say. What I heard from what Lucy said again and again is one of the things that was helpful for her advocating for herself is knowing in herself, like having clarity about how her brain worked, the fact that it is legitimate that she needs this. I think anything that we're trying to do when we advocate for ourselves comes from our own security and knowledge in ourselves that what we are saying is true. So if we can practice it in advance, if we can do some research, if we can know what we need, why we need it, and then we can practice communicating that clearly, it makes it a little bit easier to advocate for ourselves when it comes time to do so. I do want to say, if you are about to have a conversation where you really need to advocate for yourself, there's a great strategy. Speaking of rehearsing in advance, I still need to use this strategy. It's called Dear Man. We will link to it in the description below. It's a really great way for figuring out what it is you want to say, what it is you want to ask for, getting clear on it yourself. So if you have any stories about what you tried, what worked, what didn't work, if you have any advice, please add to it. Add to this video. There's a lot of times we do need to advocate for ourselves. And so I think the more that we can share stories about how we did it, what worked for us, what didn't work for us, the better. I hope this is super helpful for you. Thank you to my brain advocates and all my Patreon brains for supporting me through this journey and allowing me to, at least in little ways, pass the baton to the next generation. God, I feel old. My hip's fine, by the way. Thanks for asking. Bye, brains. Did you know we have a Discord community through Patreon? When you support the work we do on How to ADHD, you get access to a global supportive community and other Patreon perks. If you'd like to join us, go to patreon.com/howtoadhd.